Hey everyone, welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a highly visible but often deeply misunderstood group. We're going to peel back the media sensationalism to neutrally analyze the history, the ideology, and the really fascinating internal complexities of the Autonome Movement in Germany. So, let's dive into this and look beyond the burning barricades you might see on the evening news to understand the actual mechanics of this radical subculture.
To get a clear picture, we're going to hit 6 key areas today: who the Autonomon are, their journey from Italy to Germany, their core theories of liberation, the tactics of the Black Bloc, their internal conflicts, and finally, their subculture and lifestyle.
All right, starting with Section 1, who are the Autonomen, the outer layer?
So, just how big is this movement? Well, according to a 2019 report by German intelligence, we're looking at an estimated 7,400 individuals active in the Autonome movement today. This isn't some historical artifact, right? It's a living, breathing subculture with thousands of participants operating right now in modern Germany.
But what's their actual belief system? At its core, autonomism is all about rejecting rigid, traditional organizations and operating completely outside the existing social order. Instead of formal hierarchies, they organize in loose networks known as affinity groups. The ultimate goal here is to carve out completely self-determined free spaces, totally independent of established political structures and state authority.
Moving right along to Section 2, from Italy to Germany, covering their historical development.
The roots of this movement actually go back to Italian labor struggles in 1968, starting with a group called Autonomia Operaia, which translates to workers' autonomy. Fast forward to 1980, and the movement had officially planted itself in Germany, marked by the first Autonomen Plenum in Berlin and some heavily militant protests in Bremen. Just a year later, a Frankfurt prosecutor coined a phrase you've definitely heard, the Black Bloc. Their protest tactics became so disruptive that by 1985, Germany literally enacted specific anti-mask laws just to counter them.
Look at this quote from 1971. Early organizers were laying it all out on the line. True autonomy meant fighting battles entirely on their own terms. They were totally done with traditional labor unions and established communist parties. They wanted a raw movement with absolutely zero formal leadership.
That brings us to Section 3, the theory of liberation and their ideological foundations.
Okay, we need to talk about a huge cornerstone of their ideology, the concept of triple oppression. Now, traditional Marxists usually argue that capitalism is the single primary contradiction in society. But the autonomy framework, they see it as a giant intersecting web. They argue that every single person is caught in this complex mix of overlapping forces. To them, racism, sexism, and classism are equally significant forms of violence, and they absolutely have to be fought simultaneously.
So how do they actually fight this? Well, they lean heavily into self-determination and self-organization, but the real key is direct action and the propaganda of the deed. In plain English, that means taking direct physical or social action to force a change or prove a point. They are absolutely not going to sit around relying on established state mechanisms, voting, or lobbying to do the job for them.
Which naturally leads into Section 4, Tactics and the Black Bloc, Forms of Action and Militancy.
Let's clear up a massive public misconception right now. The Black Bloc is not a club. It is not a formal organization you can just sign up for. It's strictly a tactical formation. By dressing uniformly in black and masking their faces, protesters create this anonymous, unified mass. The whole point? It's a strategic method of collective defense designed specifically to stop police from identifying or arresting individual people in the crowd.
Now, when underground militant actions do happen, things like arson or sabotage, they are rarely random. The targets are incredibly specific, chosen to hit that triple oppression web we discussed earlier. Sex shops are targeted to fight sexism, foreigners' registration offices are hit to fight racism, and highly exploitative businesses are targeted to strike at capitalism. For them, this violence is a form of communication. It's a physical manifestation of their political theory, almost always aimed at property rather than people.
Let's peel back another layer in Section 5, internal divisions and conflicts. Complex camp formation.
You might look at them from the outside and think, this is one big unified group, right? Well, actually, scratch that. The movement suffers from a bitter, massive schism that primarily traces back to differing views on the Middle East conflict and the Gulf War. On one side, you've got the anti-Deutsche, who advocate for unconditional solidarity with Israel in light of the Holocaust, and they heavily critique Islamism.
But on the exact opposite side, you have the anti-imps, or anti-imperialists. They view U.S. and Israeli policies as imperialist, champion Palestinian liberation, and focus on global South exploitation. It creates an incredibly polarized environment, to the point where physical fights frequently break out between these two factions at demonstrations.
And it gets even more complex. The largest faction within the Autonomen, the anarcho-syndicalists, actually completely rejects both of those previous groups. Why? Because they view any form of a nation-state, or even just waving a national flag, as an inherent instrument of oppression. Meanwhile, you've got social revolutionaries who just want to focus strictly on localized revolution within industrial nations. Beneath the surface, it is a highly diverse and often totally contradictory ideological melting pot.
Finally, let's wrap up with Section 6, Subculture and Lifestyle, Punks, Culture, and Controversies.
Since the early 80s, the culture here has been hugely shaped by the punk scene and heavy metal music. It's a lifestyle that aggressively rejects anything commercial. Their politics literally bleed directly into their daily lives. Think of the widespread squatter movements like the famous Hafenstrasse in Hamburg, where they created alternative living spaces. They've also deeply integrated radical feminist and gay rights movements into the fold. And more recently, this intense rejection of commercial exploitation has sparked a massive shift toward vegetarianism and veganism within the scene.
But, as you can probably guess, living out these ideals is notoriously difficult. The ideology of fighting oppression had to be applied internally, too. In the late 80s, the scene underwent massive internal reckonings over sexism and sexual violence within their own ranks. In one really famous instance in Bochum, women literally expelled men from their shared communal center following a fierce debate on sexism, turning it into an exclusive autonomous women's center. It proved that escaping societal power dynamics is incredibly hard, even for the people dedicated to dismantling them.
Which leaves us with a pretty profound philosophical paradox, one that they constantly debate themselves. In a world fundamentally built on complex human, economic, and social dependencies, can anyone ever truly be independent? It's definitely a lot to chew on. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I hope this provided a clear, structured understanding of a deeply complex movement. Keep questioning, and I'll see you next time.